Welcome, folks. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to make sure you can hear me okay. Very good. All right. So this is a very brief learning community conversation, a very brief introduction to motivational interviewing. So what I'm going to ask you to do, just so that we can get through the logistics as quickly as possible, if you haven't done so already, please do type your first name and last name into the chat. And if you are sharing your computer with anybody, please make sure to type their names into the chat as well. And just so you know, this is a 1-hour learning community conversation, and it's a brief introduction to the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing. What I can also tell you, those of you that are here already, is that we do have a more in-depth version of this course that's 6 hours. And this 1-hour piece will connect very nicely to the 6-hour version that we have as well. So if you're interested after this in a deeper dive into the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing, I want to invite you all to consider that 6-hour course. It's also for free, and it's usually done in 3 2-hour increments. All right. So folks, I really don't want to hesitate any longer. We do have a fairly packed agenda for this brief overview, because I really want to leave you with a refreshed taste of this evidence-based practice, or having created greater curiosity to invite you to join us for the 6-hour. And there are some other trainings this month that are about change talk, which is part of the language of ambivalence, and then what to do with change talk once it's been evoked. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll take care of a couple of logistics and then dive right into the content. So remember, this is a brief introduction, and for some people, it's a refresher in their journey, and for others, it may be starting their journey to the practice of motivational interviewing. And yes, today is April 8th. So, as I've said in many prior learning community conversations, and let me also say, for those of you whom I've had the opportunity to be in a learning community conversation with before, welcome back. For those of you that this is our first time being together in a learning community conversation, thank you so much for making the time to be here. Very glad to have the opportunity to meet you and to engage in this conversation about motivational interviewing. Because this is a learning community conversation, it may not necessarily, what we talk about, what is relevant to you and your needs around this, may not necessarily reflect the official views of our funder, and that's perfectly okay. As we engage in this conversation, there are 65 of us together today. As we engage in this conversation, please consider being intentional about how we talk with each other. Words do have power, and we do want to be expressing welcome, respect, and inclusion to all 66 of us who are here today. We want to be putting people first with our language. Welcome again. And some folks have already let me know you're not able to be on camera for some reason. Thank you for letting me know. I'm glad you're here. You did, when you registered for this learning community conversation, you did agree to have a working camera and a working microphone. So if you are able to turn your camera on, please do so. And please use your microphone if you like. As I often say in learning community conversations, I have no objection to any one of the 67 of you interrupting me during this learning community conversation. Feel free to unmute and say, hey, I'd like to say something here. I'd like to comment, share information, have a reaction, a question. Feel free. What I would ask, though, is if somebody else in the learning community, other than myself, has the floor, that you please not interrupt them. Again, we are a learning community. It's the purpose of this conversation is not for us all to leave in agreement or on the same page. So just keeping that in mind. And then the last guideline that I would ask everybody to consider is to please speak from the I. I had this feeling, I reacted this way, I experienced this. I know this to be true. So I'm going to advance the slide and then just ask, can everybody agree to those guidelines as stated? And you can wave, you can nod, you can throw money. Excellent. You can unmute and say yes, whatever works best for you. So I'm going to share my screen again. And as you could see, if you're a speed reader and were able to read this, this is an introduction to provide what I like to think of as a foundational overview or a foundational refresher for people about motivational interviewing. And keep in mind, folks, two specific things about motivational interviewing. One is that it is an evidence-based practice, an evidence-based method of communication to help people strengthen their own motivations for considering and wanting to make a particular change. And the other thing to consider in regard to the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing is that it's verifiable. And let me underline what I mean by that. If any one of us, any of the 71 of us that are here in this learning community, were having an MI conversation, and that conversation were recorded, any of us who are trained could use a validated instrument. There are several of them. I use an instrument called the MITI, M-I-T-I. Any one of us could use a validated instrument to listen to that conversation, and we could tell, A, is the person doing motivational interviewing or not? B, if they are doing motivational interviewing, we could evaluate that conversation on two relational global measures and two technical global measures. And then we could actually count specific MI behaviors that that worker was doing during that conversation. And we could actually count how many open-ended questions there were, how many reflections there were. And that would give us an overview of the degree of strengths that the person was bringing to their practice of motivational interviewing, and it potentially could identify any growth opportunities that that person may have to refine their practice of motivational interviewing. So just keeping that in mind, it's evidence-based and it's verifiable. And Dr. Bill Miller, who is one of the creators of MI, oftentimes when he'll give a keynote speech, he will begin by saying, at this particular time, there are over 2,000 plus amount of clinical studies that show that motivational interviewing is effective. It has been highly studied. It continues to be studied. And many of you may know that Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick just released the 4th edition of their book, Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change and Grow. So this content that we're going to review today is from the most current version of Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick's book. So just keeping that in mind. So we are hopefully in this very brief interview or brief overview going to touch on these 4 points. That there is a relationship between what is identified as an MI consistent approach. And what I'm going to ask everybody to do is type these 4 letters into the chat all together. So you're actually just typing the word PACE, P-A-C-E. Everybody, all 72 of us, if we could please type PACE into the chat. And I'm doing that because I want you to associate that with an MI consistent approach. An MI consistent approach is related to this acronym PACE: partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. So we are going to talk about what that is and its relationship to the practice of motivational interviewing. They have a relationship and they are different. So just keep that in mind. Also, there are situations, well, I'll put it to you this way, because it's related to what we just talked about in terms of pace. An MI consistent approach is relevant and appropriate for any and every conversation that you may have with another person. The practice of motivational interviewing is not. I'm going to repeat that. An MI consistent approach is relevant for any and every conversation you may have. And the practice of motivational interviewing is not. Now, that may be a surprise for some people, because some people think, well, you can use the practice of MI for everything. You actually can't. And I'm hopefully going to make that point clearer as we go forward for folks. So there are a number of elements that need to be in place, and I've already alluded to probably the most primary one, which is the presence of an identified behavioral change goal. That is necessary for the practice of motivational interviewing. And let me underline, it is not necessary for there to be an identified behavioral change goal in order to use an MI consistent approach. And then, hopefully, once you have a clear sort of overview of what those elements are, you'll also be able to state what makes it possible to practice motivational interviewing. And you already have one piece of that puzzle, which is that there's an identified behavioral change goal. That is an element that is necessary and creates the opportunity to actually use this evidence-based practice. So it's an hour, it's less than an hour, and that is our agenda for this time together. And again, any point during this conversation, any questions, any comments you want to make, don't hesitate to unmute and just say, hey, I'd like to say something here. So a couple of disclaimers. One is that by the conclusion of this 1 hour learning community conversation, you will not be certified to practice motivational interviewing. Two, you also may not be proficient in the use of an MI consistent approach or the practice of MI after this hour. I know that's not a surprise probably to anybody here. And that in order to effectively demonstrate and also maintain proficiency with the practice of motivational interviewing, it actually requires continuous practice, reflection on that practice, and feedback about your practice from an informed person in order to really refine and attain competency for the practice of motivational interviewing. Yes, partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. Yes, and Carol, thank you for asking that question, and Rachel, thank you so much for typing that into the chat. That's great. And keeping in mind that in order to maintain your proficiency, because just because you've attained proficiency once doesn't mean that you're proficient every time afterward. In order to maintain your proficiency, you do have to continue to practice it, and you do need to reflect on your practice and get feedback in regard to your practice. Now, those are the disclaimers. And before we actually walk through what the practice of motivational interviewing is, I just want to ask a question to the learning community. And I'm wondering if anybody has ever heard, and if you have, you can nod your head or you can give a thumbs up. Has anybody ever heard of the term or the phrase skill drift? Has anyone ever heard of that? I'm seeing some people. Catherine says yes. Mary says no. Okay. Catherine, tell me if I'm doing justice to that phrase by saying that skill drift essentially means, let's say you go to a training and you learn a new method of interacting with patients or clients, and you learn that method in the training. And you then go back to your office, and nobody else in your office is practicing that. And you don't really have anybody to talk to about it. So you can kind of drift back into what you were doing actually before the training. Catherine does that? Am I giving it? Yeah. Okay. Catherine's giving me some applause there. Catherine, is there anything you'd add to skill drift? That pretty much covers it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the reason I mention that, folks, is I just want to underline for you that the practice of motivational interviewing is particularly susceptible to skill drift. So, and I'll say it another way, if you don't use it, you lose it. It really is the kind of practice that you have to keep doing, and you have to keep thinking about it and reflecting on it. And I am very fortunate, and I'm making an I statement here. I'm very fortunate. I'm part of a learning community that's a practice community where we practice MI together, and then we give each other feedback on our practice. And that helps keep me sharp. I didn't say this during the introduction, but I'll just say it here. I'm also fortunate to be a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, which is an international organization. It's called MINT, M-I-N-T, not like a breath mint, but it's the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. And it is people all over the globe practicing motivational interviewing and training on motivational interviewing. Okay, so just keep that in mind, this idea of ongoing practice and reflection on your practice, and being part of this kind of learning community can support what you're doing as well. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at just a brief overview of the elements that compose the practice of motivational interviewing. And again, let me draw the distinction between PACE, partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment, which is an MI consistent approach, and the practice of motivational interviewing. What we're going to focus on now is what constitutes the practice of motivational interviewing. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. So, first of all, the practice of motivational interviewing is a method of communication about behavior change and growth. It's evidence-based, we know that. It's also codable and verifiable, which we've talked about. It can decrease the ambivalence that the person has and hold on to the idea of ambivalence. It's critical to the practice of motivational interviewing. MI can decrease a person's ambivalence about a particular behavior change goal. MI can identify and strengthen a person's motivation for behavior change, their motivations, not why we think they should make this particular behavior change. It can also lead to planning about a behavior change, where it can actually help a person to develop a plan of action that we co-develop with them that actually can help them to begin to take some steps toward the change. And again, it can lead to taking steps toward the behavior change goal. And the practice of motivational interviewing actually can result in behavior change. And it can be practiced by anyone who is trained, reflects on their MI practice, and receives MI-informed feedback. And let me underline that, folks. In order to practice MI, you do not need a clinical degree. You do not need to be a counselor. You don't need to be a social worker. Anybody can learn motivational interviewing who's willing to practice, reflect on their practice, and then receive MI-informed feedback when their practice is actually coded and verified. So just keeping that in mind. Now, the practice of MI, and this again may be disappointing to some, is not a method to get people to do what we believe or what I or what you believe is best for them. It is also not a method to get people to do what you want them to do. It is also not manipulation, because we are helping them to identify their motivations and strengthen their motivations. We're not imposing motivations. It's also not you motivating the client or patient. So from this moment on, if somebody ever says to you, I practice motivational interviewing, I motivate my clients or my patients, a bell should go off in your head, because that's not what motivational interviewing is. We're not motivating them. We're talking with them in a way that they actually can motivate themselves. It's also not you, I, or anyone else telling the client or patient what they should do. It's also not necessarily time intensive. Many people are under the impression, well, I'd practice MI if I only had the time to do it. Well, you don't really need a whole lot of time. What you do need is skill, practice, and refining of your practice in order to be effective at it. So you don't always need a whole lot of time. So don't buy into that. And it is not only done by clinicians. And I'll tell you, just as a personal aside, I had the great opportunity to work with a group of folks who, and actually I'm going to take the screen down to tell you this, but I had an opportunity to work with a group of folks who were all people with lived experience, who had all survived an opioid overdose. And they were trained to provide bedside counseling to people who had been hospitalized for an opioid overdose. And what I can tell you is that these folks who I had the opportunity to work with for over a 3-month period were more effective and learned motivational interviewing much quicker than many social workers, counselors, clinicians that I had worked with before. And I think the reason for that, and this is just my 2 cents, so it's an I statement, take it for what it's worth. But my 2 cents is the reason that they got it more quickly and were more effective is because they truly understood and respected patient autonomy. They knew that those people were going to do, the hospitalized folks were going to do what they were going to do when they were released from the hospital. And that meant that some of those folks were going to use opioids again. And they were able to meet that person where they were. They were able to use an MI consistent approach. And in some instances, they were actually able to practice motivational interviewing. So just keep that in mind. You don't need to be a clinician or a trained social worker. And one other I statement, as a social worker, it was very hard for me to learn how to do motivational interviewing. I needed a lot of practice and a lot of coaching because I wanted to go back to what I had been trained as a social worker. And MI is very different. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to share and again, at any point, if you have comments, if you have questions, if there's anything you'd like me to clarify, feel free to unmute. I am trying to monitor the chat, so please feel free to put anything in the chat too. But if you have a comment or if there's anything you want to ask or question or underline, please say so. Okay, Rachel is asking, how is it so different from social work? I'm going to give you, Rachel, great question. Thank you for it. And I'll give you 2 concrete examples. Example number 1. As a social worker, I was trained to follow the client from a very client-centered, very Rogerian perspective, to meet the client where the client was and follow where the client wanted to go. With motivational interviewing, the MI practitioner is guiding the client. The client chooses the behavioral change goal, but the worker is intentionally guiding that conversation toward that behavioral change goal. So that's one difference. I'll give one more. And then Rachel, if you want to react or comment to that, please do, or anybody else. The other difference is that I was trained as a social worker. I went to Hunter College School of Social Work. I loved it in New York City. It was one of the best educational experiences of my entire life. And I think everybody should go to social work school just because I loved it so much. The other big difference is I was trained to rely on and emphasize the use of questions, coming up with questions, the right question, an effective question. And motivational interviewing de-emphasizes questions. They're a tool, they're used, but what it emphasizes is reflection. And reflections create a whole different experience than asking questions. Questions are generally about my agenda, what I want to know, and reflections invite the client to continue the conversation in the direction that they want to go in. So those are two major differences. And Rachel, I don't know if you can unmute, but I'm wondering if you have any thought or any reaction to those two differences, or if anybody else would like to comment on that. And I'm watching the chat to see if Rachel's typing something into the chat. And I would be perfectly okay if Rachel said, well, I don't see much of a difference there. But for me, it was a big difference. Rachel says that makes sense, but I feel like if that is part of social work, right? It's definitely a part of it. And I think it's more a matter of emphasis. And I had really learned how to play the piano, quote unquote, the social work piano in a particular way. And MI was like, well, now we're asking you to play the violin. Well, it's interesting because asking questions could guide them. But again, we use questions in a very intentional way. And I'll let sort of the cat out of the bag. And it's ahead of the cart, so to speak. But oftentimes we use questions in the practice of motivational interviewing to evoke intentionally what's called change talk. And what change talk is, and we are going a little deeper than is intended for this conversation, but the question prompts it, so I will. Change talk is anything that the person says in favor of making that particular change. And when we use questions in motivational interviewing, we often use them to intentionally evoke the person's desire to make the change, their ability to make the change, their reasons to make the change, or their need to make the change. And that's called DARN, D-A-R-N, desire, ability, reasons, and need. And by inviting the person to verbalize their desire, ability, reasons, and need, that is called preparatory change talk. And that is actually helping the person to strengthen and build their motivation. What will happen in the MI conversation very often is when the person has strengthened their motivation enough, they've talked enough about their desire, their ability, their reasons, and their need to make this change, they will transition into another level of change talk, which is called, yes, it's the CATS, C-A-T-S. And that language is called implementing change talk, and it stands for commitment, activation, and taking steps. And what that simply means is that the person starts to say, Stephanie, I'm going to do this. Or they might say, Stephanie, I think the way that I could do this is I could do A, B, and C. And that's where they're starting to craft their own plan. Or they might come back to Stephanie the next time they see her, and they might say, Stephanie, I wanted to let you know, since we talked last time, I did this, this, and this, and that's taking steps. So that means they're actually moving. And what I can tell you, and this is a very advanced concept, but again, the question warrants it. When a person starts to offer commitment, activation, or taking steps language, stop asking them questions about their desire, ability, reasons, or need. Carissa's like, yes, stop that. No more questions in regard to that. Because you're actually demotivating the person if you do that. Because when they make the transition into that commitment language, it's a sign that they have enough motivation to begin to plan and take steps. But that's a very That's a very nuanced and kind of high level concept in regard to this. So I just wanted to check the chat. I see that Carissa, you wrote, in my experience, reflection and summary tend to lead the client to hear how they sound and help them to say to themselves, do I really sound like that? Truly, it is an opportunity where they can hear themselves. And it's really interesting too, because what they'll hear themselves say is they're like, well, yeah, that really is a good reason for me to make this change. So another way that people think about the practice of MI, folks, is that it's a way to guide a person, and I'm choosing that word because it's very different than just client-centered counseling. It's a way to guide the person to talk themselves into changing because it's their motivation, it's their words. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, just check the time. We have 25 minutes remaining, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to touch on the other pieces that I want to share. And I will just say, because clearly you have insight about this practice, and clearly you have really great questions about it, I want to personally invite each and every one of you, if you haven't come to the 6-hour learning community conversation, please do, because it's very practiced focused. And because it's 6 hours, we get much more of a chance to be in a dialogue about this as opposed to me kind of reviewing concepts for you. And it would be a pleasure to see, all of you there if you want to come. And P.S., it's free, and I don't get any kickback from it. So if you come, it would just be great to have you there as part of the learning community. Okay, and I'm just going to check the chat. I see some other chats have come in. It is technically, it is a 6-hour course. It is technically not on the schedule for this month, but it may be on the schedule for late May, because in mid-May, I'm actually going to Bulgaria to train a group of folks on motivational interviewing as well, because there's a lot of folks that practice MI in Bulgaria. And a colleague of mine that I know through Mint has invited me to come to Bulgaria and facilitate a learning community there. So I will do my best to put it on the calendar. It'll be in late May, so we don't have a registration link that we can send you. But I will do my best to put the 6-hour course at the end of the month of May. Okay? All right. So I'm going to share my screen again. And my hope is that this learning community conversation is kind of whetting your appetite and your interest to want to dig deeper into this with a learning community. Because again, and I own this, this is my personal bias. I think there's great power in considering and practicing motivational interviewing within the context of a learning community, because it's a great way to be able to take supported risks. It's also a great way to receive strengths-based feedback. And remember, folks, the practice of motivational interviewing is not for every conversation. It's for conversations where there's an identified behavioral change goal. So the MI consistent approach, which we can remember by that acronym PACE, partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment, and the practice of motivational interviewing. They're related, but they're distinct, and they are both at our service. So an MI consistent approach is a mindset as well as a heart set. It's an orientation. It's a way of being with the person that we're in conversation with. And it's an intentional way of being in conversation with another person. And what I can tell you, it and the practice of motivational interviewing are very contrary to how we generally, and I'm making a generalization here, and I own that, and I know that we were agreeing only to make I statements, but I will say, and if you'll permit me, I will make the generalization that an MI consistent approach and the practice of MI are a kind of conversation that we're not necessarily familiar with. And I'm going to give a shorthand definition of what I mean by that. Using an MI consistent approach and the practice of motivational interviewing, we are listening to intentionally understand. We're not listening to ask our next question. And there's a difference there, folks. People can feel the difference. Also, an MI consistent approach is defined, and it's defined by MI spirit, otherwise known as partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. And the use of this, which again, an MI consistent approach can be used for any and every conversation, is a way to enhance engagement and hopefully build rapport with someone. And this is sometimes the confusing confusing part for people, is that an MI consistent approach is present and it's essential while practicing motivational interviewing. So I'll say it this way. You can be engaging an MI consistent approach with somebody and not be practicing motivational interviewing. You cannot be practicing MI unless you are also engaging in an MI consistent approach. And do not fall under the impression that simply because you're engaging in a collaborative partnership, you're accepting the person as they are and honoring their value as a human being. You are offering them compassion and you are empowering them to exercise their autonomy. That does not mean you are practicing motivational interviewing. You could not code that. That is not the practice of MI. And an MI consistent approach, just like the practice of MI, can be learned through practice, reflection, and receipt of MI consistent or MI informed feedback. We've talked about PACE. This is the mindset and the heart set. And again, partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. So it really does define how you are. And I did really want to underline that MI spirit or PACE alone is not the practice of MI. And there's a related misunderstanding here too. Oftentimes people will be under the impression that because they use the core communication skills, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, or summaries, that they are indeed practicing MI because they're using those core communication skills. That's actually inaccurate. Those skills thank you, Angelica, thanks for letting me know. Those skills existed long before motivational interviewing ever existed, and they are core communication skills. Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick, to their credit, the creators of MI, developed a wonderful acronym that everybody deeply associates with the practice of motivational interviewing. And that acronym is OARS, OARS, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Those alone, just like MI Spirit alone, are not the practice of MI. Yes, and Rachel, I'll say it again. OARS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Those are the core communication skills that we would use if we were engaging in any kind of communication. So I cannot underline, and that's why I wanted to put it in big print. And you're going to get a copy of these slides after this learning community conversation, along with your certificate for 1 hour's credit, is that MI Spirit is present and essential while practicing MI. Now, being clear though, folks, and here it comes, Olson. Please, and I love it, please be specific. What is the practice of motivational interviewing? Beautifully said. And here it is, Olson. Here's what you and maybe several other people have been asking for. This is what constitutes the practice of motivational interviewing. First and foremost, it is a client-centered conversation between collaborating partners focused on a specific behavior change that the person is ambivalent about, meaning that part of them wants to make the change and another part of them wants to keep doing what they're doing. Okay? So that has got to be present in order to practice motivational interviewing. There's a slide that's going to say this later, but if you're in a conversation with somebody who's identified a specific behavioral change goal and they don't feel any ambivalence about it, don't practice MI. Move on to collaborative planning with them because they're ready. MI is for people who feel ambivalent. You know, part of me wants to cut down the amount of French vanilla creamer that I use in my coffee because my pants are really tight. But I really love coffee with French vanilla creamer, and it's a wonderful way to start the morning. That's ambivalent. Also, in the practice of motivational interviewing, and Olson, hopefully I'm answering your question, in the practice of motivational interviewing, in that conversation where there's a specific behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about, the worker is guiding the conversation to do two specific things. One is to help that person explore and verbalize their ambivalence about the behavior change, and helping that person to identify their personal desire, ability, reasons, and need to make this particular change. Therefore, by verbalizing that, they are strengthening their intrinsic or personal motivations to want to make that change. And I just see that something else came into the chat. Oh, you're welcome, Olson. And a great question and perfectly timed. Thank you. So, folks, that's what constitutes the practice of motivational interviewing. And that's why the statement that I said earlier now makes better sense as to why you can't practice this during every conversation. What you can practice is an MI consistent approach, partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. That is appropriate for any and every conversation. And when there's an identified behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about, and I'd like everybody to type another word in the chat, and that word is opportunity. And if you don't want to type the whole word, type OPP. I'll accept that too. When the person is ambivalent about the change goal, ka-ching, it's an opportunity to practice motivational interviewing. Okay. And I see that 37 people out of our 75 have typed in opportunity or OPP in the chat. Let's get all 75 if we can. So I wanted to create a little visual chart to practice MI or not to practice MI. That is our question. And by the way, I stole that kind of and modified it from a William Shakespeare play. And if you know what play it is, please feel free to type that into the chat after you've typed opportunity. To practice. Yes, it's from Hamlet. Thank you. Wonderful. I love it. Some Shakespeare scholars out there. Fantastic. To practice MI or not to practice MI? That is our question. Okay. So hopefully this visual will help too. And you're going to get a copy of this as well. When we're practicing MI, of course, we are also using an MI consistent. We are also using an MI consistent approach because there's a behavioral change goal. The person is ambivalent about the behavioral change goal. We are not practicing MI. We still are using an MI consistent approach. There's no behavioral change goal, so no reason to practice MI. We can focus on continuing to use our MI consistent approach. Or if there is a behavioral change goal that the person doesn't have any ambivalence about, we can simply move to collaboratively developing a plan with that person. So hopefully this chart will distinguish for you when to practice MI. Yes, to be or not to be. That is the line that Hamlet utters when he is considering whether he will complete suicide or not, or he's thinking about wanting to live or die. But I tried to frame it around our conversation about motivational interviewing. Another thing that I'd like everybody to keep in mind, that one of the things that is relevant to both an MI consistent approach and the practice of motivational interviewing, and I'm going to ask you to look at me for a moment, is that we are attending to that person with our eyes, our ears. I'm touching my heart gently on the outside, and I'm also touching my belly, because we are trying to attend to that person and understand them on all four levels simultaneously. What our eyes are telling us, what they're saying, what they're not saying, what our heart is telling us, and what our gut is telling us. And that's critical to the practice of motivational interviewing, because it's about seeking to understand what the person is communicating. And trust me, folks, if you focus on that kind of attending to the person, when you practice MI, you're going to be much more effective. Because if you do ask a question, it's going to be informed in your understanding. If you do offer a reflection, it's going to be a reflection that reflects more deeply what you understand from the person. So just keeping that in mind. And that's, again, our level of attending, or our depth of attending to that person. So, having said that, folks, before we conclude, and I'm going to show you this last slide again, but before we conclude, I want to pause there for a minute. I'm going to ask everybody to take a deep breath and just let it go. And what I'd like to invite in the last few moments that we have, we covered a lot in a very tight amount of short period of time. And what I'm going to ask, and Mary, I don't know if you can unmute, but if you're able to unmute and you'd be willing to respond to this question, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is when you think about what this overview laid out, what sticks out to you most, Mary, or what resonates for you most? And there's no right or wrong here. And if we can, maybe we can have a couple of people unmute and just sort of verbalize what sort of resonates for them. And Mary, if you're willing, maybe we can go from you, maybe to Stephanie, and then to Josette, if Josette is willing to unmute as well. So Mary, is there anything in particular that resonates for you or that stands out to you in terms of our brief time together?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of people I've never met. So I appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. Anyway,
Mary does not appreciate this opportunity that I've offered her. That's a complex reflection. Go ahead, Mary.
I like I don't know a lot about motivational interviewing, so that's why I'm here today. The about being ambivalent is helpful. I've put a little star by that. I'm not trying to take other people's answers, in case you had that. That just helped clarify some things rather than someone's made a decision and talking through it. So I found the concept of ambivalence very helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Mary,
and I'm also a social worker, so.
Excellent. Stephanie, any thought, anything resonate in particular for you? And then we'll see if Josette is willing to comment as well.
Yeah, I totally enjoyed this. I look forward to the opportunity to do the 6 hours later on. I also am a social worker. I'm in graduate school and I'm almost finished. And so super excited about that. So it's an opportunity to kind of to see, as you were talking about, kind of the positionings of what social work guides us to. And I appreciate it's kind of that tripod stool. You just want to have all those pieces to be balanced. And I think that motivational interviewing helps to aid in our ability to really lean in and tune in with our clients or our participants and to develop that rapport that we're seeking. And there's a lot just in life that we miss when we're thinking of the next question. And so being mindful of being present is huge. And so sometimes my being so present in a conversation, my husband fusses at me. He's like, when you're talking with somebody, that's the only person you see. And so, although at times I recognize that may not be the right time to be so centered or focused, I appreciate that I can at least tell him, hey, there is this thing, where being present is very valuable, and it's a good thing. And
Yes.
it's an important thing that we feel that somebody's actually hearing us, and we just want to be seen and valued. But then to be capable and equipped to know what to do with that information is the intimidating part, potentially, but it's an exciting one. So thank you for just all the, I like the acronyms, and so I've written those down to kind of help, to remember. So it's just really driving home the value of presence.
Thank you. And before we go to Josette, I just want to underline, Stephanie, I think you've touched on something that's particularly powerful to an MI consistent approach and to the practice of MI. Because think about it, folks. Think about how powerful it is when somebody really feels like they're being listened to. And Stephanie, I think you said that so beautifully, because sometimes that's the most powerful gift we have to give as the helper, is that we are truly and deeply listening to what this person thinks. We can't fix it. We can't solve the problem. We can't make their problem go away. But what we can do is we can offer them the opportunity to be heard and to let them know that somebody's really trying to understand it from their perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that really encompasses some of those social work values of dignity and respect, and honoring that person. So it's just a beautiful handshake, if you will. Mhm.
Agreed. Thank you. Josette, thank you. The floor is yours.
I'm so appreciative of this 1 hour session. I've learned so much in a short period of time. I am not fully equipped and know much about MI, so I'm really interested in the next 6 hours. As a
Good.
social worker, my takeaway from this is most of the acronym that I can use within my practice and within my personal life also. I really like the DARN, DARN, how we desire, the ability to reason, and the need. And this helped me to sharpen my listening skills a little bit more. And it's really self-taught. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're so welcome, Josette. Thank you. Thanks for being here. And I hope that I will see you, Stephanie, and others in the 6 hour training. And again, if that is what would support you, as much as I'd love to see you there, but if that's a helpful resource for you, please do join us, because the learning community, being able to have a little bit more dialogue about it as opposed to sort of a brief overview, can be very rich. I can't thank you all enough. Please complete the evaluation. I would very much appreciate and value your feedback, and we will send you a copy of the slides, which you are free to share with anybody you like and to use them in any way that support your work. And again, take good care. Please make sure to wear your solar eclipse glasses if you're going to look up, and really look forward to hopefully being in a learning community with you in the future.